So how did it perform? Infinity was able to do players 5 fairly readily, 4 to 5 minute cow runs. Then we have the Insight build, able to do players 3 again, and then players 1 for Mavinas. So the more budget end of things. Some of these items are a little bit rare to find though, so I would like to see this able to do at least players 3. Rolling that up, I would also like to see the Infinity version able to do player 7 fairly readily. Now, reasoning for this is just the build itself is only able to do AoE farming or general farming use cases because it's so dependent on the Pyres, right? You can't really boss kill with this setup all that well, unless you're running like a Crushing Blow mercenary or something like that, maybe. So in general, this character versus character that can also do boss killing, you're probably going to choose that other character. So at least increasing the DPS for this purpose would give it more of a niche, I think. Fire versus cold, I think fire DPS needs to be increased. Clear times were about 25% slower on average, so it should be above cold, in my opinion. This is because fire does not come with a CC effect, meaning when you gear it out, you actually gear it out, you probably need some sort of crowd control in the build, and you trade off damage to attain that. So you'll see here, physical DPS is much lower because we swapped in the defensive Nightmare Mercenary. Immolation Arrow, the GCD should be removed in my opinion. It's very obnoxious, it's hard to play around, and the dot damage in particular needs to be balanced to be increased much higher, because right now the dot damage is barely relevant, and I think if it was more of the skill's damage, that would give it more of a niche compared to Exploding Arrow. Like Exploding Arrow could be your instant damage, and then Immolation Arrow would be like your combination half and then half damage over time. I think that would be a really cool interaction. Mana cost is also pretty egregious. 27 mana every 7 frames is quite high to account for. We have energy, we have plus max mana, we have mana per kill that we have to slot. I think if you didn't have to put all of these things in for a build that doesn't have insight, that would be much more appealing, easily attainable by more budget versus in-game setups. So reducing it by at least 25% cost would be nice. Keep mana relevant, but not required, right? So one thing I have to talk about first here is that all of these in-game setups were marred by the fact that you have to carry a Hellfire Torch. The build itself benefits so much from plus skills because that the skill point allocation increases your DPS for both the fire and the cold skills. However, the 5% chance to cast a Firestorm on striking, because we're including our physical DPS and we're actually hitting enemies with this build, means that you're constantly producing these firestorms because you're piercing more than 20 targets every second. So it's just, you're running a freezing arrow setup, but you're spamming these firestorms. Thematically, it just doesn't fit in at all. It makes me not want to play the build, basically. It's so terrible. It's like, oh. It also is a lot of visual clutter because the Firestorm is larger than, say, a Druid's Firestorm. And you can't even see your arrows. You can't see your projectiles when the Firestorm goes out. So it actually hampers my ability on the battlefield to line up shots, which is such a huge negative impact, in my opinion. I had such enjoyment with running the Mavinas setup because I was testing it without the Hellfire Torch, which is stupid that I should enjoy it just because of that reason. However, here we are. Even with the fire builds, like if you're running the fire build with a Hellfire Torch, it fits in thematically. However, you can't see where your Immolation Arrow pyres are piercing and landing, which is a huge detriment to the build to be able to kite the enemies properly to get them into those pyres, right? So there's just nothing good to say about the Hellfire Torch. So with these builds, I actually went with Faith. You could be thinking you might go the Ice Bow with the Nightwing's Veil, and this would increase your cold DPS even more, which is true. It's about 8% DPS higher. However, you give a lot up when you go the ice route. You give up a lot of your off element DPS, and you give up your physical DPS as well. I think that's too much of a hit. I would rather maintain high physical damage and maintain high off element damage so that you can take care of immunes a lot more readily. So this is the reasoning here to go the Faith Bow. Now the Faith Bow will let you hit a higher attack speed, a lower frame count, which is quite nice because it gives that fanaticism aura, which gives us attack speed, attack rating, and extra physical damage. And combine this with attack speed from our amulet, jewel in the helmet, and on gloves. Now the cool thing here is you can either go 10% attack speed on your gloves, and then a higher level like 14 or 15 fanaticism, or you can go like a level 12 or level 13 fanaticism and 20% on your gloves. So it's fairly configurable in that sense, which is pretty cool. So we are running Enigma in this setup. The ability to teleport and reposition our Conviction Aura mercenary weapon is quite nice. There is the potential that he will be on the other side of the screen, and this just accelerates the process of getting this debuff applied to the enemies that you are trying to target and focus down. Now that being said, the Amazon cast rate breakpoints are terrible. So, and we don't have any cast rate allocated in the build aside from our offhand lidless wall, or if you happen to get lucky with a rare ring, but I wouldn't rely on it. It's just for repositioning the mercenary, and then the faster run walk on this item will be useful for getting those piercing attacks lined up easier. Plus the strength, always nice, saves you some attribute points that you can then put into energy instead. And the magic find, going to come in very handy for general item farming. So it's true, a Chains of Honor would give higher damage to demons, damage to undead, and higher plus to skills that you could fit in on the helmet. However, I feel the Enigma is just the better choice here. We're running Cannot Be Frozen on the helmet instead of running a Ravenfrost, because while Ravenfrost is really nice, we don't necessarily need the attack rating from it. There are a lot of things that we don't need from it, so I felt like going the Cuirass here was a lot more just balanced and gives you the hit recovery, gives you the resistances you need. Dual Leech Ring, going to be very nice because we are doing higher physical DPS in that sense, and the attack rating is going to be provided from our faith, from our fanaticism aura, so you don't have to focus as much on that aspect. So I feel like this is a very good composition. It works fairly well. Now, something you could do is notice here the skill point allocation is quite high for the cold, but we only go up to Exploding Arrow, and then we invest into Critical Strike, and then after that, only when we have a few points remaining do we put points in Penetrate. So with the fire build, you're having to focus a little bit more on putting points into your fire skills, so you have less points for the passive and your off element. I kind of spread them between physical here and the cold arrow DPS backup, and then we went with the defensive Holy Freeze mercenary to slow enemies, and I felt this worked really well with the Immolation Arrow in particular, because you're creating these pyres on the ground that deal dot damage, having the cows so that they're not frozen, that they're able to still move into the pyres was pretty neat, I felt. And the slow was really nice as well for keeping your mercenary alive a little bit better. That being said, it's kind of, if you're not paying attention to where your mercenary is, it can be annoying. So this other variation here, I tested reducing our off element DPS and boosting the freeze length of our freezing arrow, basically. And that felt really good as well. So even though it was just a few, a second and a half longer, it was enough so that when you're only using the exploding arrow, you could quickly just cast a freezing arrow in between your exploding arrows and it would still CC the monsters. This felt good because it was coming from your own character. And if you had a situation where your mercenary was out of position, but a cow was coming for yourself, you could still CC the monster without having to teleport. And remember, our cast rate is really slow, so there's the possibility that a cow charges in and hits you and interrupts your, attempted teleport. So in that sense, this felt better. So I'll be testing both of these versions when it comes to 2.4 revisions from the Fire DPS, which will be quite interesting. And then the insight, nothing, pretty much only difference here is the chains of honor, the biggest change at least. Because we're not teleporting with the insight build, there's less dependence on keeping track of your mercenary. So we drop the Enigma for Chains of Honor. That extra physical damage to demons, damage to undead is going to be such a boon for general farming. And the life leech here is actually quite nice, as well as the all resistance, not having to find as much all resistance in other places, but it means you don't need a dual leech ring. You just need a mana leech ring, which is quite nice. And then you can go with a cheaper glove, for example, like just a plain 210. You don't, rare glove, you don't need the crafted gloves. And then the Harlequin crest, a lot cheaper as well. So all of these things just coming together to make for an easier setup. And we're running the Ravenfrost in this configuration as well. Running Harmony actually felt very good for kind of running ahead and like grouping the cows as well. And the insight pretty much covers your mana cost. It felt amazing in combination with the fast attack speed again. So there's the fire build. I went with a DPS setup with the defensive mercenary here. And then for the Mavinas, this was a lot slower attacking than some of the other builds. So I did, and you might not have as many skill points readily available at this point in leveling your character. So what I did is I shifted the off element fire into the passive tree. And there's a good reason for this, because you're not able to run as fast. You were kind of getting mobbed a little bit more. So having that extra tank with the Valkyrie was quite nice. And then you can also take care of your off element with just running the Lightning Bolt and the Titan's Revenge and the Tiamat's on the off, right? So that felt really good. Saving skill points to be able to run higher penetrate, higher pierce. These were the biggest thing for your DPS increase at this point, because you don't have those extra attack rating, for example. So I went double Ravenfrost just to get extra attack rating. We went the Eye of Lich to get plus skills, Life Leech, and it just worked out fairly well. The fire setup was a little bit different for the Mavinas. You couldn't invest in the Valkyrie because of having to put more points into the fire skills themselves. However, you still got a high level penetrate and pierce, so it went fairly swimmingly as well.